Good afternoon and welcome to our symposium today. On behalf of the Allen Public Library and the crew of the Bark Lone Star Sherlock Holmes Literary Society, we welcome you to our symposium today, and we appreciate you joining us and hope that you enjoy it. My name is Alan Osborne. I'm a member of the crew of the Bark Lone Star. I've been in the society about 3 years, and I'll be your host for today's symposium. We'd like to thank all of you for attending, and also like to thank the library again, especially Tom Keener for helping us arrange this. And special thanks to the presenters. Most of them are down here in the front row. You'll be seeing them shortly. Let me see, where's that? As for me, my name again is Alan Osborne. I've been a Sherlockian since I was a child. When I was in third grade, I bought a copy of The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes from the Scholastic Book Club at school. I still have that book, and I've been reading those stories ever since. I'm an investitured member of the society, and most of the other speakers are too, and what that means is we've met established requirements, and in our society that means to give a Sherlockian presentation to the society and to donate books to a worthy cause such as a library or school, assisted living facility, and so forth. And I'm also trying to work on the Fortescue Scholarship Program, which is a series of exams to test knowledge of Sherlock Holmes. Our topic today is going to be Sherlock Holmes on stage, radio, film, and television. The Sherlock Holmes stories are literary works written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. There were 4 novels and 56 short stories, and together those are called the canon, which is all the collective stories together. The 4 novels were A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of the Four, and The Hound of the Baskervilles. Most people have heard about the Hound of the Baskervilles and His Last Bow. The 56 short stories were later compiled into books: The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, His Last Bow, and The Case Book of Sherlock Holmes. They've not only been published in stories, including many in foreign print languages, but in other media such as stage, radio, film, and TV. And you'll hear more about that shortly. So why Sherlock Holmes? People think, why do we do this? Well, first of all, the first story was A Study of Scarlet. It was written in 1886 and published a year later. And ever since then, for the last 130-some years, there are those of us who enjoy Sherlock Holmes, and some of you in school currently or in past years in school had to read the stories as part of your literature courses, or you may have just read it on your own. So then we get asked the question, was Sherlock Holmes a real person? How many think he was? Dean does, Cindy does. In some of our minds he is. But so that we don't mislead or anything, Sherlock Holmes was a fictional character that Doyle portrayed in the stories. He was the main character, and I get asked that question all the time, was he a real person? Well, maybe. He was sometimes known as the man who never lived and the man who will never die. And I have a feeling that another 130 years from now, people will still be enjoying Sherlock Holmes. So as for our crew, ours is, we're called the crew of the Bark Lone Star. A bark is a 3-masted sailing ship. We took our name from the story, The Adventure of the 5 Orange Pips. The ship was mentioned in the story, and of course we're in the Lone Star State, so it's appropriate. We normally meet the first Sunday of each month at a La Madeleine restaurant in Addison on Beltline Road. And we do also have a nice website and a Facebook page. You can go to the website and sign up for notices, and there are notices there about our meetings and other activities. In addition to our meetings, we sometimes have picnics and parties and attend plays, and we also do symposiums similar to this in other locations. And one of our purposes for existing, other than for our own enjoyment, we also enjoy sharing information about Sherlock Holmes and Watson and Doyle with others, which is what we're doing here today. Any questions about any of that? If not, again, we appreciate you attending, and we'll begin our first presentation. And our first presentation is Diane Tran, who's going to give us an introduction to Sherlock Holmes.
I am here to talk about basically a crash course on Sherlock Holmes, not just the stories itself, but basically the culture and the fandom of itself. So, Sherlock Holmes, the original 60 stories, is known as the canon. And a canon in the dictionary means it's the core stories, the ones that are written by the original author, and these are the original stories. We also have a play on words, where we also use the word the sacred writings. They cannot be changed. We take them almost literally, word for word, right down to the misspellings. So in our analysis, that's part of it. So it was originally published, or at least the first story was originally published. Studying Scarlet was actually in the Beaton's Christmas Annual. And then the next story, the Sign of Four, was published in Lipton's. And the rest of it, so the short stories and The Hound of the Baskervilles and the rest, were actually in the Strand magazine. And you kind of have to understand that there was no television at the time, there were no movies at the time, and one of the best ways for you to get your fix of stories was through magazines. Now, books were actually fairly expensive. They were thick, they were usually huge, they were Dickinson novels, and they were quite expensive. But one of the cheapest ways for you to get entertainment was magazines. After a month, they come half off. So people who, when literacy was basically half the population, these were actually given to school children at the time. So it became quite the legacy. So they were originally published by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is on the left here. He based the character Sherlock Holmes loosely on his school teacher, which is Dr. Joseph Bell, part of his university education. Now, he would deduce the medical problems of his patients through deduction and reasoning. The original illustrator, or at least the most famous illustrator, is Signet Paget. Signet Paget here is on the left, and that is his brother Walter. And the story goes is that Conan Doyle wanted Walter Paget as the illustrator. The names got mixed up, and Sidney got the letter, and he accepted. But Walter ended up becoming the model for Sherlock Holmes. So as you could see, Sherlock Holmes is based on his brother Walter. So it's a funny little story. Now, there is a word that you call an enthusiast of Sherlock Holmes, and we're kind of divided on what to call it. You either are a Sherlockian or you're a Holmesian. What's the difference? Technically not much, but those who are from Britain, for whatever reason, they prefer to be called Holmesians. Everyone else in the world is Sherlockians because they go by first names. Not necessarily true, but it's actually interchangeable. And this is actually a society, the Baker Street Irregulars of New York, and they have a wonderful, kind of almost like a convention, a dinner, where many of the Sherlockians all over the world would come and meet. Hundreds of thousands of them, some of them thousands, if they can afford it. But this is actually one, and we are of a society, we are sanctioned by the Baker Street Irregulars of New York, among other societies as well. Now, what we Sherlockians love to do is that we play the game, or the great game. Basically, we analyze, we treat the stories as if they were true. These people existed. Sherlock Holmes existed. Watson existed. The characters, the villains existed. The stories themselves existed. But the thing is this, where does reality and fiction collide? Are they nom de plumes of real life people? Was Urian Adler a pseudonym for another character who is actually historical? Was Moriarty real? Was he actually named Moriarty, or was he named after someone else? So, and that's where the game comes in, and it's a fun game. I recommend it. One of the things that is really interesting is that before there was internet, the word fan fiction and fan art was actually known as pastiche. Sherlockians were not the first to coin this phrase, but we certainly popularized it. And then when the internet came, it turned to fan fiction and fan art and fan film, basically. But it is literally an artistic work that mimics or imitates another piece of work. That is pastiche. Believe it or not, the Bible has pastiches, such as the Divine Comedy and Paradise Lost. Shakespeare's Hamlet is a pastiche. It is not the original story. It's the original story was actually from the 13th century. And then we also have Gilderstein. Reginald and Gilderstein are dead, and that's a pastiche as well. All the rest of his works are actually pastiches. Many of them are, like Othello and Romeo and Juliet and Troilus and Cressida. He was not the original idea behind it. He readapted and rebooted them. These are pastiches, believe it or not. We have The Shape of Water, which is based on Creature of the Black Lagoon. Kill Bill, which is based on exploitation films. Star Wars, Flash Gordon. And Indiana Jones, Doc Savage. So in itself, Sherlock Holmes, in a way, is a pastiche. He is based on the grandfather of the inventor of the mystery writer, which is Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin. And he had a detective around that time, Victorian, mid-Victorian this time. He had a narrator who has no name, but he did, in fact, solve mysteries with deduction and reasoning. So, but why are we still talking about Sherlock Holmes about 125 years later? What makes us go back to these stories and go back to these characters? Why do they still exist, and why do we still obsess over them? And the answer is kind of timelessness. No matter what you do with Sherlock Holmes, it's amazing what you can do with it. He has been portrayed, as of the last count that I checked was over 352 times as of this year. As of this year, he is the most portrayed literary character in fiction. Now, there are some debate on that because the other three fictional characters, human characters, the other three is God, Jesus, and Dracula. And he's somewhere within those four. So you could change the period which he comes in. This is Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century, which was a cartoon series that came out. Stuck him in the future. It's still Sherlock Holmes. He still solves mysteries. He still has his Watson. He still has his Lestrade. He still is there solving mysteries. You can turn him into a mouse, and he's still Sherlock Holmes. You can change their sex, their gender, their race. It's still Sherlock Holmes. You can actually put on a mask, put him on a cape. He's still technically Sherlock Holmes. Batman, believe it or not, is actually an extension of Sherlock Holmes. I love this one right here. You can see the original Cape Crusader. Bam, bow, So, yes, Batman is actually, his inspiration was the world's greatest detective, which is Sherlock Holmes. He has inspired many other detectives throughout his existence, such as Poirot, such as Sam Spade, even Monk, and even House. And he has been in many different vestiges, battling many different types of characters, from Dracula to Jekyll and Hyde to the elder ones, such as Cthulhu and even zombies. So, yet, he has been done in such ways where you almost don't recognize him, but it's still essentially Sherlock Holmes, such as James Bond. He is Sherlock Holmes just with women. That's all. So and then you have him with a team. Sometimes he has teams. The entire NCIS series is basically Sherlock Holmes with teammates. The many CSIs are basically Sherlock Holmes. There's always a Sherlock Holmes character with teammates. Now, right now, in the English language, there are 3 huge adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. There is the guy, God, I forgot his name, but the original, the recent film series with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. We have the Sherlock series, which is out in the BBC, and we actually have Elementary, which is here in CBS. It's funny that when you have King Arthur come out, it bombs in the box office. Robin Hood came out, bombs in the box office. Yet Sherlock Holmes, that film made $1 billion. That's just the first film. The second film even hugely more popular than even that. And right now, recently, Robert Downey Jr. went on his Instagram and asked his fans, which would you rather have another film of? Iron Man 4 or Sherlock Holmes 3? And guess who won? Sherlock Holmes 3. And that is actually in pre-production right now, and it's going to be released 2020. So, thank you for hearing our presentation, and keep deducing it.
All right, thanks, Diane. Diane, no, you can sit down. I forgot to intro her, but she's been a Sherlockian for a couple of decades now. She is a member of our society, and she is a cartoonist, a graphic designer, educator, and writer. She worked for Disney on The Great Mouse Detective. Okay, well, close. And next we have Lisa Sherwood Fabre. She came to Sherlock Holmes a little later in life, but she's developed a deep interest in it, and she's given presentations with our society before. She is published and has written some Sherlock Holmes related stories. And let me see, I'm trying to work through all of this, Lisa. She belongs to our society, the Giant Rats of Sumatra, and the Studious Scarlets Society. And she has been published in the Baker Street Journal, which is a quarterly put out by the Baker Street Irregulars. They meet in New York every year. We're a scion society of the Baker Street Irregulars.
Okay. All right. You guys will have to, I just learned this week I have another, two essays coming out in a collection of essays it'll be September, October next year, and it's kind of a women's studies textbook about the women of the canon, and I have 2 essays in that, one about Sarah Cushing and another one about Scandal. Okay, are we able to play the clip? Were you able to get that to work? No? Okay, never mind then. Oh, it was just a very short clip from a radio show with Nigel Bruce, which I think a lot of people think of Dr. Watson when they think about when they think about Dr. Watson, they think about Nigel Bruce. But he was not the first, but he was probably the most well-known. And when he was out both on radio and in film, and at the same time. And on the radio shows, every week he would start off with, "I remember when," this is really bad. I know I don't have a good accent at all, but "I remember it was a blustery day in the winter of 1891. And so he was always introduced the stories, the radio show that week. So what do we mean when we talk about Watson? In literary terms, he was considered what was known as a sidekick. That is, that he served the protagonist. He was somebody who the protagonist, or the hero, in this case Sherlock Holmes, could trust. He could rely on him for special services, such as being he was a medical doctor, and he was Sherlock Holmes was constantly saying, "Don't forget your service revolver, Watson." I don't know why. There were a couple of times Sherlock Holmes was armed, but for the most part, he always relied on Watson to be to bring his service revolver. There was also a sidekick always has a long-standing bond with the hero. But in our case, in the case of the Sherlock Holmes and Watson was not just the sidekick, he was also the biographer. At one point, Sherlock Holmes says, you're my Boswell. And Boswell was actually a Scottish biographer at the time. And so he was the narrator in all but 4 of the stories. And this is very important. We'll talk a little bit more about his role as narrator in a moment. So what did we know about Watson as he was portrayed in the original canon? He was actually only 2 years older than Sherlock, which made him 29 when he met Sherlock in London after he returned from being in Afghanistan in the Afghan wars. He was a medical doctor, he was a surgeon, he'd been wounded, and that was why he returned from Afghanistan in India. And he had a little bit of a pension, but he couldn't live on it alone, so he was looking for a roommate, and somebody said, I know somebody who's looking for a roommate as well, and that was how he met Sherlock Holmes, and they moved into 221B, Baker Street. He was athletic, and there was also, it mentions him playing rugby at some point. He also had a mustache. We know that because at one point, Sherlock Holmes tells Watson, well, if you had smoked this cigarette like this person did, you would have singed your mustache. So we know he had a mustache. So this is how Paget pictured him. If you'll notice, he was tall, he had a mustache, he looks a little bit athletic there, he's thin, he's not paunchy in any way, and he was a very dapper dresser. Very, very different from some of the characters that we'll see later on. In all, there have been 20 portrayals of Watson on the stage, another 16 in radio, another 28 in film, and actually I got a couple of, well, no, that's a TV series. There's a new one in film too, and I'll talk about that. 22 on television, and 15 different portrayals in TV series. So he was around almost as much as Sherlock. There are a couple of places where there were films or something where Sherlock appeared, but Watson didn't. And I'm not going to go. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through the faces of all the actors that I just listed up there. Both of us would be tired. So I'm just going to I picked out a few of the most curious ones about Watson. The earliest stage play that I was able to find reference to was in 1893, and it was called Under the Clock. And the latest appearance that I found was mentioned was in London. There's a play that came out this year called Baskerville, a Sherlock Holmes mystery. And actually, I was just in Indianapolis where there was a debut of another Sherlock Holmes play. And I'm blanking out on the name at the moment, but it was a very interesting one as well. So one of the earliest actors was a man by, his last name was, Gillette. I'm sorry, I have a cousin named Gillette, so I have to really ask myself which is, the difference is an E at the end. And so he was Gillette, like the razor. And he had, the first actor to play Watson was Bruce McRae. And he only played for 2 seasons, and then they replaced him. But one of the most interesting was a play that was done in New York in Los Angeles in 1981. It was called The Crucifer of Blood. And in that one, Watson was played by Jeremy Brett, who is considered, by some people consider him the consummate Sherlock Holmes. He did a series out of England, and but here he is, Jeremy Brett as Watson, which was kind of interesting. Then we go on to radio. Now, the earliest radio shows that I could find were appeared in 1930 and 31, but of course then we get to the 1940s, and again we get into Nigel Bruce, and he actually did the radio shows the same time as they were filming the movies. Which is, so that's why a lot of people recognize Nigel Bruce because he appeared both places. So did, at the same time also Norman Shelley then did a series in the 50s and 60s. The interesting thing is if you'll recall from the movies and also the radio show, Nigel Bruce tended to sound like he was a little bit of an idiot or something. He wasn't. They actually have a term for him. It was called the Bubus Britannicus. But he, and we'll get into a little bit of why he kind of took on that role as we go on. There were a series of 8 silent films that were a French and British company called Eclair. And these were actually supervised by Arthur Conan Doyle. And you can actually find a few of them on YouTube. I found 2. There was one called, one was the Copper Beaches, and the other one was the Musgrave Ritual. And you had Georges Trevelyan, who played Holmes, and there was notations in what I found about somebody named M. Moyse as Watson. However, I've not found a photo, and in the 2 little clips, the 2 little movies that I saw on YouTube, Watson doesn't appear. So I have no idea, really, whether or not I can't find any more about him. Probably the most well-known, of course, interpretation, of course, are the 14 films. Oh, you were going to change the 15 to 14. It's 14. I know. It's 14. I made a mistake. I can't count. But it was 14. And like I said, they were portrayed at the same time. And, of course, we were introduced to the Bubus Britannicus during those. Here's probably the most famous portrayal of a Watson in terms of the name, Ian Fleming. He is not the same as the person who wrote the James Bond books. He was actually Australian, and he made a series of British movies in the 1930s. But there was, believe it or not, there's more than one Ian Fleming out there in the world, or was at one point. Of course, one of the more recent ones was Jude Law. He's made 2 films. Obviously, a 3rd one is coming up. We just learned. There's also a new one coming out at Christmas this year that is a spoof on the Sherlock Holmes, and purists are going to have problems with it because it is a spoof. And it's Will Ferrell plays Sherlock Holmes, so and John C. Reilly, who's in a lot of Will Ferrell's films, is going to be the Watson. So you can just imagine what it looks like. You can see the trailers; they're out now. And like they both have the hots for Queen Victoria, which on television, there was the Granada television series, and they did 41 episodes and there were two different Watsons, David Burke and Edward Hardwicke. And of course, we mentioned the new series. The British series, we have Martin Freeman, who also happens to be a Hobbit. And we have Lucy Liu, who happens to be female, which is very different. Also, you showed a picture of Miss Sherlock. This is a Japanese film. I binge-watched it a couple of weeks ago. It's excellent. And Watson is a physician. She had been with Doctors Without Borders. She had come back from, was it Syria? Yeah, Syria. And her last name is Watto, so they refer to her as Watto-san. So they managed to get Watson in there. I wanted to share with you, I know we're supposed to be focusing on literary and we're supposed to be working on media, but I did want to mention this series because of books because I think it provides a very interesting perspective on Watson. This is a series by Robert Ryan, and he said, when I started preparing to write this series about Watson, the first book, and which takes place after Sherlock Holmes retires, and I'm trying to think if we're talking, yeah, it starts off in World War I. And he said, I started thinking about the history of the Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle, and he said, I realized, we saw a picture earlier of Dr. Bell. He said, Arthur Conan Doyle was kind of Bell's Watson. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of fashion Watson along the lines of Arthur Conan Doyle. He said, after all, they were athletic, they were both physicians, they were both married twice, and so that's what I'm going to model my protagonist after. So as you can see, we've had quite a different portrayals. For the most part, they tend to be older men, although we do have one case when they were younger. And they certainly were slightly doddering at times. And there's a reason for some of this. Sometimes they were also female. Whoops, went too far. But the major difference when we start talking about the portrayals in the media versus in literature is that you've kind of pulled away one of the major roles that Watson had when you read a story. You needed a narrator because you always saw this through Watson's eyes, except for 4 stories. This is 4. Because I had a writing professor once who said, the thing is that if you wrote from the first person, from Sherlock's point of view, it would be all in his head. It would be, I saw this, and then I thought that, and then I put this together with that, and boom, there's the perpetrator. I solved the mystery. And there's not anything, and there's no action. It's all going on in his head for the most part. So instead, what you have is Watson describing the scene, describing the action that was going on. And then at the very end, usually, he says, so, how did you come up with all this? And Sherlock Holmes says, well, I did this, and I thought that, and boom, this is where it came in. This is how I made my decision or my deductions. And the thing is, on film or stage, all of a sudden, you don't need a narrator. You don't need somebody saying, and now Sherlock Holmes is going to walk across the stage and he's going to see this and he's going to, no, you can see it. You don't need somebody telling you. And so what's left is being this foil that says, well, gee, Sherlock, how'd you come up with all this? And so that's really what you get left with when you start taking away the narrator's point of view. But regardless, he's always faithful. He's always helpful. He's always willing to go along on an adventure with Sherlock, even when the only thing you know is that you're needed immediately. And he always answered the call. And that's what I got.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. Okay, our next speaker is Ann Cadell. She's a relatively new member of our society, and she first met Sherlock in her freshman year of high school, and she read all the way through her parents' 1938 version of the canon, which are the collective stories. And she belongs to our society, and she is working her way through our program. So she's going to present on Sherlock Holmes on stage. Ann?
Footlights on. Spotlight on me, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sherlock Holmes on Stage, where we will explore how the world's greatest detective climbed off the printed page and into the limelight where he's been ever since. Dr. John H. Watson introduced Holmes to the reading public in 1887 in A Study in Scarlet. Now, Alan thinks that Conan Doyle really wrote those stories. We're going to humor him, and we'll pretend that they're all Conan Doyle's work. But you and I know Holmes and Watson were really real. So we'll say Conan Doyle introduced Holmes in 1887. Leading up through 1893, he produced one more novel, 24 more short stories. By this time, he was getting pretty tired of Holmes, but the reading public wasn't. So in 1893, Doyle tried to kill off Holmes, having him plunged to his death along with his arch nemesis, Professor Moriarty, at the bottom of the Reichenbach Falls. The reading public went into mourning. Conan Doyle went about his business, and the century ground on. But as the century neared its end, Conan Doyle was building a new home. You know how expensive that is. He needed a little extra cash. He thought, if I bring back Sherlock Holmes in a play, this could be very lucrative. He wrote a 5-act play. He introduced it to two very prominent theatrical producers in London, Henry Irving and the improbably named Herbert Beerbohm Tree. Irving was not interested. Tree was interested, but he wanted Doyle to make a lot of changes, and Tree wanted to play both Sherlock and Professor Moriarty himself. I don't know how that would have worked. Doyle didn't know how it would work either, and he said no. Now, Doyle's literary agent also thought that this play had potential, but it needed some work. He contacted an American theater producer, Charles Frohman. Frohman contacted a very popular American actor, William Gillette. And together they proposed to Doyle, can we have Gillette do some changes, rewrite this play, star in it, we'll get it really going. Doyle thought about it, said, okay, one restriction, I don't want Holmes to have any love interest. So Gillette and the agent say, yeah, sure. So Gillette starts working on this play. He and Doyle are communicating back and forth, mostly by telegram. Eventually, we get the famous telegram from Gillette, may I marry Holmes? Now, by this time, apparently, Doyle has either softened his attitude or he's just tired of the whole thing. So he says, you may marry him or murder him and do what you like with him. So Gillette is touring in San Francisco at this time, but he works on this play. He gets a 4-act play written in less than a month. And while he's in San Francisco, his secretary is staying in the Baldwin Hotel. His secretary has Gillette's play and Doyle's original play. Baldwin Hotel catches fire, burns to the ground. Secretary barely escapes with his life. The plays do not escape. Secretary runs to Gillette's hotel in the middle of the night, wakes him up. The hotel's burned, the plays are burned. Gillette says, no. Is this hotel on fire? No. All right, tell me about it in the morning. So he turns around, Gillette turns around, he rewrites the play again in less than a month. By now, it's 1899, it's time for Gillette and Doyle to meet in person. So Gillette travels to England. He gets on the train out to the countryside to where Doyle is living. Doyle comes to meet him at the station. And who steps off the train? Sherlock Holmes himself. Doyle is just absolutely flabbergasted. He can't believe it. Holmes whips out his magnifying glass. He looks Doyle up and down, peers into his face, says, unquestionably an author. Doyle just bursts out laughing, and they're friends from that point on. Back at Doyle's home, Gillette reads through the play for Doyle, and Doyle is really feeling more friendly at this point to Sherlock Holmes, and he actually says, it's good to see the old chap again. So the play became a smash hit. Here are some of the original promotional materials for the play in New York. There was one copyright performance in England for legal reasons, but Sherlock Holmes really debuted in New York in October 23rd of 1899 in Buffalo. It played a couple more places in New York and in Pennsylvania, and it had its big Broadway appearance at the Garrick Theater on November 6th, 1899. And it stayed in performance until June 16th of 1900. It was a massive success. Gillette pulled out all the stops with lots of special effects, things never before seen on stage. It also toured nationally, especially in the western states of the U.S., going on through till March 30th of 1901, and other touring companies played smaller cities in the U.S. and also in Australia. Holmes finally made it back to England with a pre-debut in Liverpool and eventually the London debut on September 9th of 1901 at the Lyceum, which was the big theater in London at the time. It was just as much of a hit in England as it was in America. It was supposed to run for 12 weeks, but it was sold out and it was extended until April of 1902. They even had a gala command performance for King Edward and Queen Alexandra. Then the tour played around England again, with two subsidiary companies playing in the north, headed by H.A. Saintsbury, and in the south by Julian Rice. And at the same time, other companies were producing the play in places like Australia and Sweden and even South America. Here's some of the original cast. We can see Holmes in the middle, and he looks very Holmesy, and he's got a three-pipe problem, and he's really working it out. He's deducting. A little more action. He's confronting Professor Moriarty over there, and I think Holmes is getting the better of Moriarty. And here we have Dr. Watson looking extremely disapproving because Holmes's one vice, when he's feeling too bored and doesn't have enough work to do, he tries to inject some cocaine. Watson, the good medical man that he is, knows just how dangerous that is, and he's always nagging at Holmes to kick the habit. But we see Gillette really getting fixed in the public mind as the face of Sherlock Holmes. And Gillette didn't stop, even though other actors like Saintsbury, H.A. Saintsbury, were taking over the Holmes role in some other productions. Gillette just kept going. He did 256 performances in New York and 216 in England, and then he just toured and toured until 1932. He did 1,300 performances in all, but that wasn't enough. He was in a silent film version of the play in 1916, which was thought to be lost and was recently rediscovered in 2014, so it's available again to see. And finally did a radio version of the play in New York in 1935 when he was 82. Even after he hung up his Deerstalker, the play just took on a life of its own. It went through numerous revivals. Even the Royal Shakespeare Company did a revival starting in 1973. But an awful lot of what we think of as Sherlock Holmes today really did come from Gillette. So our little magnifying glass, that actually shows up in the canon in the very first book of Study in Scarlet. Holmes is using a magnifying glass. The Deerstalker came from the Sidney Paget illustrations. Holmes had an even smaller head than I do. That does not fit well. And that curved pipe, that is all Gillette. Holmes in the canon smokes a pipe, but it's a straight pipe. But Gillette decided, I want the audience to see my face, even when I've got this pipe in front of me. So he went for the deep curve, and that has been the Sherlock Holmes pipe ever since. Even the sentence, "Elementary, my dear Watson," one of the most famous sentences in English, is never anywhere in the canon. And there's a little bit of dispute about this, but most people think that Gillette was the first one to use that phrase. One of the scripts of his play has the phrase, "Elementary, my dear fellow," and on stage they think that he alternated that with "Elementary, my dear Watson." Some other great actors got their start with Sherlock Holmes as well. One of the small characters in the part is young Billy the page boy. He has a bit of a dust-up with some of Moriarty's thugs, but he wins through, he gets back and brings his report to Sherlock Holmes. Who do you think this is playing Billy?
Charlie Chaplin.
Ah, you stole my thunder. Now you recognize him, the little tramp. Yeah, that was one of Chaplin's first stage roles in 1903. He was playing in a different play with H.A. Saintsbury. And Saintsbury liked him so much, he got him into a touring production of Sherlock Holmes, playing Billy. He did so well there that he was sent to London to play Billy with the great William Gillette. He toured again as Billy in 1906 before he left Billy behind forever. But I like to think that the little tramp and his extremely physical acting style, Billy really helped start him down that path. We've had quite a few other famous actors. I know you all recognize Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. Well, Mr. Spock was also Sherlock Holmes with the Royal Shakespeare Society, or the Royal Shakespeare Company, I should say, in 1975. And I think that there's a lot of similarity between Holmes and Spock, and their very logical and unemotional style, so it was an excellent fit. You might think that the Gillette play just took all the oxygen from the room and there was no room for other plays, but oh man. Doyle tried his hand at playwriting again. In 1910, he adapted one of his favorite Holmes stories, The Speckled Band. And this play he wrote and produced entirely on his own. It premiered in London in 1910 at the Athenaeum with H.A. Saintsbury again playing Holmes. The story around The Speckled Band is about a wicked stepfather who's trying to murder his stepdaughters so he can get their inheritance. And he has a deadly swamp adder. There's no such snake, by the way, but for some reason Conan Doyle wrote about a swamp adder that Grimsby Rylott, our villain, brought back from India. And he's going to have this swamp adder slither up the wall and down a bell pull into the girl's bedroom and bite the girl and kill her. And he's already managed to kill off one of the stepdaughters. The other stepdaughter runs to Holmes looking for advice because she doesn't understand what happened and how her sister could have died. Holmes figures out what's happening. You know, there's a snake, it's slithering down the bell pull. And he saves the day. He beats the snake back. The snake bites the villain dies. The play was quite a success. Audiences liked it, but one of the things that both audiences and critics said, even though Conan Doyle had a real snake, a boa constrictor, playing the part of the snake, People said, oh, it looks so fake. This is such a good play, but this obviously fake serpent. Plus, the stage crew had to actually handle the snake behind the scenes and pinch it on the tail to get it to go where it was supposed to go. They didn't really enjoy doing that. So finally, Conan Doyle had to give in, and then they had to use a fake snake. Now, how real does that look? But apparently, the fake snake worked better than the real one, and the play went on to be a considerable success. Now, Gillette could not be left out of this either, and he did a radio broadcast of the Speckled Band in 1930, and I don't think they had any issue about the snake being real or fake. Somehow they managed it. I bet it was just somebody going, sss. So the plays just kind of kept coming. Even right about the time that Doyle first tried to kill off Holmes, the Under the Clock musical satire appeared in London. It was primarily a satire aimed at some other theatrical folks, including our old friend Beerbohm Tree. And it didn't last too long, but it was, Holmes's first appearance on the stage. There was also a Sherlock Holmes 5-act play that was put on in Glasgow, Scotland in 1894 with John Webb playing Holmes. And apparently it was quite action-packed with lots of gunshots and loud noises, and one of the reviewers said, nervous people should not go to see Sherlock Holmes. So the plays just kept on coming. Conan Doyle took one more attempt at playwriting. He wrote a 1-act play called The Crown Diamond Affair in 1921. That one was much less well-known than some of his other works. And all of the other playwrights and actors got into the business. A number of plays were written that were based on the canon stories, like The Blue Carbuncle, The Sign of Four, The Hound of the Baskervilles, of course, The Sussex Vampire, and The Mazarin Stone. But then some of the plays were also a little more out there and had Holmes meeting other great Victorian people, like in Sherlock Holmes, in the case of the Jersey Lily, he meets Oscar Wilde and Lily Langtry, the famous actress who Judge Roy Bean had such a crush on out in The Only Law West of the Pecos. And better still, in Sherlock Holmes and the case of the West End Horror, he meets up with not only Oscar Wilde, but George Bernard Shaw, Gilbert and Sullivan, Henry Irving, our old friend, the producer, who didn't want to do Sherlock Holmes, Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, and even H.G. Wells. So I don't think there were Martians in the play, but there should have been. And the musical theater also got into the act. Two of the best known were Baker Street the Musical in 1965 in London, with Jerome Cooper Smith, Marion Grundeff, and Raymond Jessel. It ran to 311 performances, so it was pretty popular. It took its story largely from Scandal in Bohemia with Irene Adler, the woman, in the canon. And of course, they have to have Holmes fall in love with her again. Nobody wants Holmes to be a total robot. Another popular play in Exeter, England, was 1988's Sherlock Holmes the Musical. And here he crosses paths again, not only with Professor Moriarty, but with Moriarty's daughter, Bella. But my favorite for just sheer inventiveness of all the plays, in 1937, an American author of detective novels named Ruth Fennesong adapted The Speckled Band for the Federal Theater Project to be a marionette play. And this was not, a comedy or a children's production. This was intended to be a real mystery story. But unfortunately, I have not been able to find any actual pictures of it. And once again, I'll bet they probably used a fake snake. So Holmes marches on, including in Dallas. In 2014, the Dallas Theater Center did a wonderful production starring popular Dallas actors Chamblee Ferguson and Kieran Connolly as Holmes and Watson, looking good. But my favorite thing about this production is the director was Kevin Moriarty. And there are two, well, actually, one more Holmes play coming up this holiday season. The Richardson Theater Center and the Runway Theater in Grapevine will both be doing The Games Afoot, or Holmes for the Holidays, both starting on November 30th. I highly recommend that you go see one or both and keep that Sherlock Holmes theatrical tradition alive. Thank you.
Our next presenters are Cindy Brown and Tim Klein, and they're going to actually they'll give an introduction to the radio plays. After the initial Sherlock Holmes movies with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, they also engaged in some radio plays. There were hundreds of them, so they'll give an introduction to that, and then they'll do a little radio play up on stage. So Cindy and Tim, are you going to come up too, Dean? Okay. They're investitured members of the society as well. And Dean, who's standing down here, he's actually a BSI from the Baker Street Irregulars, so I'll let them come up on stage and get started here.
As you can see from the program, Sherlock Holmes is not just on the printed page, but has conquered all of the major entertainment media. This included radio, which from I can see, looking at the audience, that probably a lot of you are not familiar with network radio. But from the late 20s till the early 50s was probably the most popular entertainment medium in the country. Every household had a radio in the living room. Everybody had their favorite shows. And among the favorite shows for virtually the entire 20 or 25 years, now called the golden age of radio, was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, was a major, major hit. It was the creation of a woman, the actress-author named Edith Meiser. She was a successful Broadway actress in her early 20s, in the 1920s. When network radio came along in the late 20s, she instantly recognized that this new medium was going to lead lots and lots and lots of material, and she was one of the people that could provide it. And she was spectacularly correct on both counts. She immediately became a very successful in-demand writer and remained so for virtually the next 25 years, writing everything from off-the-wall comedy for the Marx Brothers to soap opera tearjerkers for famous actresses like Helen Hayes. Well, in 1927, she decided that Sherlock Holmes, of whom she had been a major fan since she was a young girl, was a natural for this new medium. It took her 3 years to sell producers on this. They all told her, as she said later, nobody's interested in the old boy anymore, which is shocking to us today because Conan Doyle was still alive in 1927 and could have written more stories, and don't we wish he had? Anyway, in 1930, she finally convinced the George Washington Coffee Company to sponsor the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. According to legend, she convinced them that Sherlock was a coffee drinker, even though coffee, as far as I know, is not mentioned in the canon. The show was an immense hit and lasted for nearly the next 20 years. She kept writing the scripts off and on, mostly on. Do you know how many scripts she is supposed to have written? The experts say 312, which I find totally astonishing, having written about 5 myself. But there are 60 stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. She set 59 of them for radio scripts, several of them more than once. But she also, according to the experts, came up with 85 original plots, which she also set several of more than once. So you have Conan Doyle coming up with 60 stories in about 40 years. Edith Meiser coming up with 85 original scripts in about 20 years. If you want to extrapolate from that and come up with a figure that denotes the relative merit of a man versus a woman, be my guest. We're actually going to do a very short radio script today to give you an example of what it was like. Now, you notice this presentation has had no visual effects like the others. That's because it's radio. You had to create the visual effects yourself while you were listening. Now, this play is not like the typical play from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and it doesn't show Holmes solving a crime. But I think the astute among you will figure out the Sherlockian connection pretty quickly. The name of the play is How Much Is That Hound Dog in the Window?
Hello, miss. I want to buy a dog. Hello, miss. I want to buy a dog. Miss, I want to buy a dog. Really must.
Hello, my name is, hello, sir. Welcome to Sherman's Pet Shop, located in Pinchin Lane, London. My name is Chloe. How may I serve you?
Like I said 3 times, I want to buy a dog.
What sort of dog?
I want a hound. It's got to be a hound. I want one that can track a man across the moors.
The moors, sir. Where are the moors?
In Devonshire, of course. The hound needs to be sure-footed and able to run fast.
We've got a lot of hounds in the back room, sir. Marty can bring one out, whatever you choose. Perhaps you want a greyhound. They run fast.
No, not a greyhound. I want something that will hunt.
A pack of 20 foxhounds could track a man across the moors. I could give you a quantity discount. 20 animals complete with collars, a month's supply of dog food, and all their shots for the price of 17. You would have to arrange transportation, though.
No, that's not what I want. I want a hound.
A basset hound? Oh, they're very intelligent, and they're so cute. There's one in the back called Pickles.
Miss, listen to me. I have come all the way from Devonshire to buy a hound. I have only a few hours. I have to catch the train at Victoria Station later to get back home before I'm missed by my sister. What other hounds do you have in the back?
There's a bloodhound, sir.
No, bloodhound. There can't be any mention of blood. It's supposed to look like natural causes.
What?
Never mind. No bloodhound. What else do you have?
There's a Basenji from Africa. They're known to be fast runners.
Basenjis don't bark, do they?
No.
That won't do it all. I need something that can send long, haunting, scary, echoing howls across the moors in the dark of night to terrify the peasants and worry the people of the manor. I'd like it to be the size of a large calf.
The size of a large cat? I've got just the thing. A dachshund named Pierre. I'll have Marty bring him out.
No. Miss, I want a dog that will strike horror and terror into the hearts of everyone who sees it.
Then you want a Chinese crested dog. Believe me, they are ugly. They will give a person nightmares.
I want a hound.
All right, sir. Here at Sherman's Pet Shop, we pride ourselves in satisfying our customers. Now let me think.
Miss, I should look somewhere else.
Oh, no, sir. I'm sure we have what you want here at Sherman's Pet Shop. How about an Afghan hound?
No. For once, there are no Afghans in this story.
If you want a big dog, I have an Irish wolfhound.
That's more like it.
There's only one problem. It only hunts Irish wolves, and they're extinct. How about an otter hound? Oh, it has the same problem.
It only hunts Irish wolves?
No, sir, what a silly idea. It only hunts otters. You don't have an otter problem on the moors, do you?
Odder than trying to get a hound, no.
We do have a Norwegian elk hound, but
Let me guess, it only hunts elk?
Norwegian elk.
Look,
But
lady.
it's very good at that.
Look, lady, all I want is the fiercest, nastiest, loudest, and most dangerous beast you can give me.
Well, why didn't you say so? Marty, bring out the Pekingese.
Ugh.
Thank you, sir, for visiting Sherman's Pet Shop, where all your pet needs can be met. And please come again, sir. Good day. Is he coming back?
I say, miss. I wanted a hound. But you ain't no friend of mine. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Next we'll have presentations about Sherlock Holmes on film, and we have Ben Everett up first. And Ben's been with our society for a short time, and but he's been fairly active in that time, and he's got a degree, a master's degree in film, so he's going to kick off the discussion about film, and then I'll follow up shortly after that. Yeah?
Thank you very much. I'll be up here in a minute. All right. I was going to open, talking about film, I was going to open with Warrington Gillette and the Charlie Chaplin story, but Ann beat me to that. I will say that Chaplin liked that play. He thought he was doing very good in it, and he was hoping that they would take him on and keep on going on tour with him. But the role of Billy was relatively minor part in the play, and what they would do is just whenever they went to a new city, they would just hire a new boy to play the part. And so Chaplin was a little disappointed when he found that. But it did lead him into the music hall and ultimately into Fred Carno, and that's what led him to tour in the United States and get his telegram from Mack Sennett of the Mack Sennett Keystone Company, and ultimately the rest is history. So here we have a photograph of Mr. Gillette. Sherlock Holmes on film, Sherlock Holmes has been depicted on film at least since 1901, which is, I think, is really, really interesting because you get to see this character develop as he's being developed. Of course, Doyle continued to write stories up into the end of his life in the 1920s. And it's interesting to see how Holmes is portrayed in various film roles up to that time. Today I'm going to discuss two films in particular rather than talk about the whole history of Holmes on film in general. I'm discussing the adaptation of two adaptations of The Hound of the Baskervilles. I should also mention before I move on, Liz mentioned the Eclair films, the French films, and you can see two of them on YouTube. I would like to say that even considering those films are 106 years old, and you know, understandably there have been significant technological changes when it comes to how films are filmed and screened, and not to mention changes in acting. Those movies stink. They really, really stink. They are bad. I can't really explain what Conan Doyle saw in them, but I can only say that they are not good movies. Fortunately, they're short though. They got that going in their favor. All right. Okay. We move on to the 1939 adaptation of The Hound of the Baskervilles. This was produced by 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox was one of the big five of Hollywood's golden age of film studios. The big fives were, in no particular order, you had Fox, Warner Brothers, Paramount, RKO, and MGM. MGM would probably be the premier studio. It was the best of the lot. Swine microphone. During that period, if you wanted to work at a studio, you wanted to work at MGM. In talking about these films, I'm just going to give you a little background on the production history of the films and some of the key players involved. We'll start with, before I get too carried away, I want to talk about how this film is promoted. This is an actual poster from the film. I think it's interesting that we do not see Holmes on the poster. We only see that famous silhouette with the deer stalker and the pipe. We do see our Sir Henry Baskerville, our romantic lead, Richard Green. And he's actually, as you can see, credited above Rathbone and even Nigel Bruce. Nigel Bruce gets fourth billing, our Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson, as is previously mentioned, a lot of people didn't quite know what to do with Watson as a character when it came to adapting films, and so he was often relegated to be he was many times, I should say, relegated to be a minor character or just omitted altogether because they thought we're doing Sherlock Holmes, people want to see Sherlock and not this other guy. I do like, though, that this is, they are emphasizing the more mysterious and spooky elements of the story in the advertising here. They decided to do this film. I think one of the key reasons they decided to do this film began production in December, I believe, of 1938, and it was released in March of 1939. They continued filming on it until February of 39, doing reshoots and pickup shots. I think one of the reasons they decided to go with Sherlock Holmes and do a movie like The Hound has to do with the resurgence of horror films. Horror films were very popular in the early part of the 1930s. I'm talking about American horror films like Dracula with Bela Lugosi and Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, but they had trouble getting distribution overseas. And around 1935, Great Britain just said, we're just going to ban them. We don't like these movies, we're going to ban them. And that was impulse enough for Hollywood to say, all right, we'll just stop making them. Well, in 1938, you had a theater that was running 24 hours straight, and they were just showing two films, and they were co-features of Frankenstein and Dracula, and they were having lines around the block, people wanting to see these movies, and that was enough of an impulse, that convinced Hollywood to say, you know what, the Brits can do what they want, we're going to start making these kinds of movies again. So Universal got to work, since they had kind of started the whole thing, and they released The Son of Frankenstein, also starring Basil Rathbone. Rathbone plays the titular character. That was also the last time that Boris Karloff officially played the monster on film. Lionel Atwill, who is also in this film, he plays Dr. Mortimer, is in that film as well. For anyone who's not seen it or is familiar with the movie Young Frankenstein, you will remember Kenneth Marr's character with the wooden arm. He's doing a takeoff of Lionel Atwill's character in that film. Lionel Atwill's character has a backstory in which he explains that when he was a young boy, he encountered the monster, and the monster ripped his arm out by the roots. And there actually is a dart game in that film where Atwill is sticking the darts in his arm. That was an ad-libbed bit. Atwill had kind of a very peculiar sense of humor, and he snuck a little piece of cardboard up his coat sleeve and started sticking darts in it. All right, let's move on here. All right, let's talk about our Sherlock Holmes. This is Basil Rathbone, obviously. He was born in South Africa. He was born in Johannesburg, but he was educated in England. Had a illustrious stage career, and he had done film roles up to this part. This was a unique part for him in that he was getting to play a hero. More often than not, he was stuck playing villains. You could see him play villainous parts in movies like David Copperfield from 1935. He's Mr. Murdstone in that movie. And of course, in 1938, he was Guy of Gisborne in The Adventures of Robin Hood. He has the famous fight with Errol Flynn at the end of the movie. Rathbone was an exceptional fencer and a master swordsman. That's actually what he really studied going into school, and just kind of came into acting as a result of that, which is fantastic. When you watch him perform as a swordsman, he's a really incredible athlete. Unfortunately, since he often played the villain, he couldn't really win a lot of his sword fights. He had to lose. He had to die. But you can see him sword fight in movies like Robin Hood. You can see him sword fight. And the same year, he did a film called The Tower of London. He has something of a sword fight in that movie. He plays Richard III. You can see him in The Court Jester with Danny Kaye. He has an excellent sword fight in that film. Of course, in The Mark of Zorro with Tyrone Power, he has a climactic sword fight at the end of that movie with our title character. And of course, as I said, he had to lose them all. Rathbone was really enthusiastic to get this role. He was a great, self-professed great admirer of Holmes, and had read all of the stories growing up as a boy. And he was determined to play Holmes as authentic to the written word as possible. This movie was a tremendous hit for Fox. This movie was a tremendous hit for Fox that year, and the following year they did another film, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and then Fox kind of put the movie on the back burner, put the Holmes series on the back burner, and Universal Studios picked it up in the 1940s, and they completed the rest of the films. From 1942 to 1946, they did several Sherlock Holmes films with Rathbone and Bruce. They were all set, they all had modern settings, so it was Sherlock Holmes. Some of them were adaptions of the Doyle stories, and some of them had Sherlock Holmes fighting Nazis and things like that. Rathbone got a little sick of playing the character in 1946, and so he officially stepped down and moved on to other things. But by that point, he had been typecast in the role. People would come up to him on the street and call him Sherlock, and that didn't always amuse him. But he would return to the role periodically. He did a few television shows where he played the character. And I think he did at least one stage production in the 50s. But beyond that, he tried to distance himself as much as he could. But he admitted as much in his autobiography, which was called In and Out of Makeup, that he knew at this point he was very much associated with the role, and try as he might, there really wasn't a lot he could do about it. His Holmes is amazingly energetic, very, very smart, very intuitive. He's just an all-around good Holmes. It's not a coincidence that for a lot of people, when they think of Sherlock Holmes, they'll think of Rathbone. He's very indelible in the part. I don't know what else I could say that other people have not said better than me about the man and the character. Of course, this particular adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles is famous also for Holmes' last line in the film, which is "Watson, the needle," a reference to his cocaine habit. That line was actually censored in Great Britain until the 1950s. Holmes is leaving a room, he turns to Watson, makes the line, and what they would do is just cut the audio out at that time. So he turns, he says something, but audiences couldn't hear him, the screen fades to black, and the end comes up. Let's move on to our Watson. Again, this is Nigel Bruce. It is interesting to note that with our current controversies and concerns over immigration, particularly from Central America and Mexico, that Nigel Bruce was born in Mexico. He was not of Mexican heritage. I believe his father was Scottish. They just happened to be in Mexico at the time he was born. He was, of course, brought up overseas, and he had a specialty of playing kind of blustering, semi-buffoonish English types in Hollywood films. So Dr. Watson was kind of a good fit for him. He's also in the very first two-color Technicolor feature film, a movie called Becky Sharp, The main actress in the film, Miriam Hopkins, apparently was so difficult to work with that she made him cry at one point. I do not know the specifics. I only know that she did bring him to tears. He continued playing Watson even after Rathbone had given up on the part. I think Rathbone was substituted by Tom Conway, I think, who was George Sanders' brother. Tom Conway was known as the nice George Sanders. If I can go back to Chaplin one more time. Nigel Bruce is in Charlie Chaplin's final film that he made in the United States before he was locked out of the country. He's in Limelight. I believe he plays a theatrical producer or an agent in that film who's based on a real person Chaplin knew. He's best known for his roles as Watson, and he did a lot to shape the character, and a lot of Holmes purists are resentful to him because, particularly as the series progressed, he became more and more of a buffoon and flat-out imbecile, and you would wonder why in the world anyone, much less Sherlock Holmes, would want to spend time with him. But he's fairly competent in this movie. For anyone familiar with The Hound of the Baskervilles, they will know that Holmes is absent for a third of the story, and Watson has to carry that stretch of the story. And he's actually really competent when Holmes is not on screen in this movie. He does a very, very good job. I think he handles himself very well. But of course, when Holmes re-enters, he's got to go back to being the kind of oafish bumbler. Nevertheless, if it wasn't for Nigel Bruce, I'll get to Nigel Stock in a minute. Nigel Bruce, we wouldn't really have a Dr. Watson. As I mentioned before, previous adaptions, previous Holmes stories were content to underutilize the character or omit him altogether. But from this point onward, any Holmes story had to have a Dr. Watson in it. You can thank Nigel Bruce for that. All right, we move on to Richard Green. He is our Sir Henry Baskerville. He also plays Sir Hugo, his villainous descendant, in the flashback in the film. He's unrecognizable under this big heavy beard they stuck him in. He was a British actor. He'd been appearing in movies up to this point, I'd say about maybe 1936 or so. So he'd done about 4 movies before this time. They were really trying to push him as a handsome leading man type. His film career never quite took off. He continued to work. He went to Britain during World War II. He enlisted in the military, and he did fight in the war, but he was actually pulled out of active service so that he could come back and be in more movies in the UK. As I said, he's credited above Rathbone and Bruce in this film. His first film, I believe, was 4 Men and a Prayer, which is a John Ford movie. Anyone here who is familiar with Mr. Ford will know that when you worked with him, they were really throwing you in the deep end of the pool. So if whatever hesitations Mr. Green must have had about film acting as opposed to theater acting, he had to overcome them very, very quickly working with a man like Ford. He really broke into theater acting in the early 30s, as a matter of fact. He did the famous play Journey's End. I mentioned the horror films Frankenstein and Dracula before. James Whale, the director of Frankenstein, was brought to Hollywood specifically to direct a film version of the play Journey's End in 1930. So that's an interesting connection. That's Mr. Green's interesting connection. What? I know that. All right. Let me move on here. He became more famous as a television actor in Great Britain rather than a movie star. In the 1950s, from 1954 to 1959, he played Robin Hood on the Adventures of Robin Hood television show. He was a little old by that point to play the part, but it was, as I said, he was very popular in it. The show had a very, very long run, and it actually spun off into a few movies. And I'll get to that a little later as well. All right, before I get to the 1959 version, I should also talk a little bit about the Hound in the 39 version. The Hound was like a Great Dane, I believe. It's credited in the film as Chief. Its real name was actually Blitzen. They changed the name not because they were afraid people would laugh at it, thinking it's a reindeer name or something like that, but because 1938, you had a lot of anti-Nazism in Hollywood. And so Blitzen being a German name, they decided it would be better if we just called the dog something else for the time being. And so he's credited as Chief in the film. All right, 1959, 1959, we moved to Hammer Films in Great Britain, The Hound of the Baskervilles. This is the very first Sherlock Holmes film to be shot in color. It's interesting to note that the horror elements are really amped up here. Not so much the mystery, but the horror. They don't even mention Sherlock Holmes on the poster at all. You don't even see him. You see this scary-looking dog on the poster. This looks like a wolf. It does not at all look like the Hound in the movie. And you have these two characters here, these two faces below the film. Those two people do not appear in the movie. They just needed some scared faces, so they drew some on the poster. That was what Hammer did. They sold on kind of sensation. They wanted shock value. And their version of the film is more of a gothic thriller than it is a straight-up mystery story with horror overtones. We'll move on to our Holmes here. All right, that's another poster. Never has the night known a beast like this, the Hound of the Baskervilles. All right, there is an actor who appears in the movie on that particular poster, but I'll get to him in a second. All right, that's another one. Peter Cushing. He's our Holmes here. Peter Cushing. I'm going to gush on Peter Cushing because I love the man. This was his first time playing Holmes. He was really, really enthusiastic to do it. Hammer had worked with him before on 2 prior films. And I think he made a fantastic Holmes. He studied the Paget drawings very carefully. He, like Rathbone, was a huge admirer of the original Holmes stories. He did have a collection of the original Holmes stories from the Strand magazine at his home. And Cushing was a very meticulous actor who, one of the reasons that I admire him, and so many other people do, is his attention to detail in his performances. Anyone who's seen copies of his scripts will see just how almost absurdly annotated they are. I've seen copies with drawings on the back of them of particular props that he wanted, little notes to himself, changes to dialogue, all sorts of strange things. I've seen notes telling him, don't blink, don't sniff when you do this, don't blink when you do this. And so people who worked with him, directors who worked with him, say that he was not an actor who would give you something different every take. He was like a machine. He would do the same thing every time. He had everything worked on in advance. And he was so meticulous that he really didn't do rehearsals. He didn't really care for rehearsals. He was ready to go when you called action. And they often referred to him as Props Peter or Props Cushing. He was excellent with props. If there was no prop business for him to do, he would invent something for himself to do. Folding clothes or writing something on paper, lighting a cigarette, or, as you can see here, fooling with his magnifying glass. Cushing would play the part again for the BBC in 1967-68. The BBC was doing a Sherlock Holmes series, and the actor that they had been working with, Douglas Wilmer, decided he wanted to move on. And so the BBC let him go, and they picked Cushing as his replacement, which is fitting. Cushing was Great Britain's very first television star in the 1950s. That's back when television broadcasts were live. They would do 2 broadcasts a week, one on Wednesdays and one on Sundays. And as I said, they were broadcast live. There were no delays or anything like that. If the actor flubbed a line, the actor flubbed a line, and you saw it. The role that kind of put him over the top as far as television roles go was Winston Smith in 1984, or an adaptation of 1984. You can see that performance on YouTube. I highly recommend that you check it out. Although it is the Sunday performance, and Cushing felt that his Wednesday performance was better than his Sunday performance, but that Wednesday performance has since gone lost, and only the Sunday performance remains. I frankly think that he's being a little too self-critical. He did a fantastic job in that film, or that adaptation. It actually generated something of a controversy in Great Britain at the time. They actually brought it up in Parliament. They were afraid that it was too intense for audiences, particularly the ending of the film when Cushing's character's being interrogated by the state. Cushing had always wanted to be a movie star. He'd worked in the stage and television and film, but that was his goal, was to be a movie star. And he actually, when he was a young man, his father gave him a one-way ticket to Hollywood. Or I should say it was a one-way ticket to America. He arrived in New York and when he arrived in New York, he began writing casting agencies and film studios asking for work. And he was very, very lucky in that he did get work that way. As a matter of fact, his very first film role was in 1939, the year our previous film came out, in an adaptation of The Man in the Iron Mask, which was directed by James Whale, whom I mentioned before. He was the director of Frankenstein and was brought to Hollywood to do Journey's End. That was James Whale's final film. He didn't die or anything, he just retired afterwards. Cushing kind of plays the main character in that film. For those of you familiar, it's the adaptation of the Alexander Dumas story about twin brothers. Leslie Howard is ostensibly he's the main character. He's playing the good brother and the bad brother, but they needed an actor for Howard to act with while he was doing his lines. So here's good brother, Leslie Howard's a good brother, and then he did an actor. Cushing's playing the bad brother, and then vice versa. Cushing playing the good brother, Howard playing the bad brother, and then they'd come in and do optical work later to take Cushing out and put Leslie Howard's performance in, which was good for Cushing because then he'd get to see, he was allowed to look at the rushes every day, something actors aren't usually allowed to do, but because he did not have an important part, they let him look at the rushes, and he learned how to act for film that way. He said he was kind of appalled the first time out looking at himself. He thought he was terrible, but he allowed himself to go each day. He would go in and modulate his role or adjust his role ever so slightly until he kind of came to grips with it. I think his next film was a Laurel and Hardy film. Anybody seeing any adverts for this upcoming Steve Coogan, John C. Reilly movie, Stan and Ollie? He's in the Laurel and Hardy film A Chump at Oxford, which was the last movie that those two made at Hal Roach Studios. He's playing kind of an Oxford snob in that movie. If for those of you who don't know, Stan gets hit on the head and he goes from being an imbecile to a genius, and he's accepted into Oxford, and he has a lot of Oxford kind of snooty fraternity brothers who don't think he belongs there, and Cushing is one of them. He did a few more roles in Hollywood. I know that he's in Vigil in the Night with Carole Lombard, which is a rare, serious, dramatic role for her. But as the war started, he began to get a little nervous and homesick, and he managed to make his way back to the UK via Canada. And he basically went back working on the stage, and it was there that he met Sir Laurence Olivier, and began touring with Olivier's and Olivier Shakespeare Company. And Olivier began doing Hamlet, and Cushing was cast as Osric in Hamlet. And Cushing traveled with that for quite a while. It was also when he returned home, he met his wife, Helen. Helen was to become kind of the dominating person in his life. He would tell people later on that his life really started when he met Helen, and his life ended on the day that Helen died. Helen provided him with moral support and not just love, but moral support, and was always there to pull for him whenever he would get a little depressed as to the state of his career. She was the one who kind of encouraged him to keep going on. I can't stress enough how important she was to him. They were very, very much in love. Cushing would continue acting up until the 1980s. Aside from Sherlock Holmes, the parts he is most famous for are other films for Hammer. He came to Hammer's attention because of the 1984 production. They sent a script to him. They decided they had been doing some science fiction films up to that time, and they wanted to move on into horror films, but they wanted to do a property that had some kind of familiarity with the public. Hammer was a very, very small company. And so they decided, I've got it. I know what we'll do. We'll do Frankenstein. It's the third time I've mentioned Frankenstein. And they needed someone to play the Baron. And so they went to him. He agreed to do it. And he played the Baron in 6 subsequent Hammer films, 5 of them directed by the man that directed this film, Terence Fisher. Terence Fisher also directed episodes of that Richard Green Sherlock Holmes show, and I mentioned that Robin Hood program, and I mentioned that program spun off into a few movies. One of them was called The Sword of Sherwood Forest. Terence Fisher directed that as well. Peter Cushing is in that as well. He plays the Sheriff of Nottingham. Very, very good in that part. He also played Dr. Van Helsing for their Dracula films opposite Christopher Lee, whom I'll get to in a minute. And he did Doctor Who. He played Doctor Who twice in 2 Doctor Who movies that are not canon. For anyone here who are Doctor Who fans, they are not canon. Doctor Who was not very well known outside of the UK at the time, and so this producer decided, well, I'll just do a generalized Doctor Who movies, and maybe that will get American audiences interested. He played a character named Doctor Who, who's not an interdimensional Time Lord or anything. He's just this eccentric scientist, and he built the TARDIS in that film, the telephone box that he travels around in. For the 50th anniversary, the Doctor Who 50th anniversary, I understand the creators attempted to do something to make him. I understand the creators of the new show attempted to do something to make that character canon, but they just couldn't get the rights to that character for whatever reason. He's also in Star Wars. He played Moff Tarkin in Star Wars. For those of you who saw the Star Wars film that came out last year, what was it, Rogue One? The producers of that film spent a ridiculous amount of money and resources in an asinine attempt to bring him back to the screen. I don't like Star Wars. Not a Star Wars fan. My garbage means more to me than Star Wars does. But anyway, we'll move on to our Watson. This is Andre Morel is Dr. Watson. I think Morel's my favorite Watson out of all the Watsons that I've seen. He does a fantastic job with the character. All right, since I'm being encouraged to rush here, I'll have to move on. I can only say that you have to see the performance to yourself. Watson has a very real kind of commanding demeanor. He has a real kind of dash-it-hole type delivery. He's very authoritative. He did serve in World War II. He reached the rank of major, so he does have that military bearing. He acted with Cushing opposite Cushing in 1984. They would act together again in a movie called Cash on Demand. It's a weird kind of Christmas Carol type film where Cushing plays this very uptight bank manager, and Morel plays a bank robber. That's another one that's worth checking out. All right, move on to our Sir Henry. Sir Henry is Christopher Lee, Christopher Frank Carandini Lee. Christopher Lee's it's an interesting part for him in that he's getting to play a romantic lead. Up to this point for Hammer, he'd been kind of their monster guy. He played the monster in The Curse of Frankenstein. He played Dracula in the film following that, Dracula. The same year this film was released, he played the Mummy in The Mummy. He was grateful to Hammer because Hammer was the company that gave him kind of his biggest roles. Up to that point, he'd been doing small work and things like that, but he wasn't able to get work. Not because he was a bad actor, but because he was too tall. He stood 6'5", so a lot of other actors resented having to work against him. And for whatever reason, people claimed that he was too foreign looking. I don't get that, but that's the way it was. Plays Sir Henry here. He does a very good job as Sir Henry, and I know it was a role that he admired very much. Christopher Lee would play Holmes himself. The year following this, or a year or two following this, he appeared in a West German production called Sherlock Holmes and the Deadly Necklace, which was also directed by Terence Fisher, our director here. That movie's not very good at all, I'm sorry to say, but he's Holmes in that film. Another actor, Thorley Walters, plays Watson, more of the Nigel Bruce bumbling Watson. He would play Holmes again for Canadian television in the 1990s, an older Holmes in a couple of made-for-television movies. He also would play Mycroft, Holmes's brother, in Billy Wilder's film The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. He did some Star Wars films, Count Dooku in the new trilogy. He worked with Martin Scorsese in Hugo. He plays a bookseller in that film. He's in all of the respective Hobbit movies. He's in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and in the Hobbit films, playing Saruman the White. He was a descendant of Charlemagne. He's claimed to have been a descendant of Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, somehow. Let me see. His cousin was Ian Fleming, the James Bond author. He apparently did some spy work with Ian Fleming during World War II. What he did during the war is still classified, so we're not exactly sure what he did. He played the title character in the Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun. He played Francesco Scaramanga in that film. He continued working up until the end of his life. He died at the age of 94 in 2015. I'm not ashamed to admit that I actually, when I heard the news, I cried a little when he died. I'm a big horror movie fan, and if there were a Mount Rushmore for horror film actors, he would be on it. He would probably be the last one. The genre wouldn't really exist if it weren't for actors like him and Peter Cushing and Vincent Price and so on and so forth. He had kind of a love-hate relationship with the characters that he played because he didn't want to be typecast, but he did a really fantastic job at it. And he's a sort of actor we're just never going to see the likes of again. Let me see what else I have. All right, that's it for me. I know I ran a little long here. I'm sorry about that. Thank you for indulging me. I do wish I could have spoke longer, but I'd better be going before they drag me off. All right. Thank you. Good night.
Hi, my name is Rusty. We're going to be covering the animations of Sherlock Holmes. Most of y'all who probably read or learned of Sherlock have learned it through books. You know, you picked up your dad's, Hound of the Baskerville or something like that. I didn't. I did not like to read when I was a kid, so for me, I got Sherlock through cartoons. That's just the way I was. So through this, I want to talk about the different adaptations he had throughout the years. The biggest one you probably have seen is Great Mouse Detective, which we talked about a little bit earlier before. It was in '83, so right when I was a kid, this came out. I was happy. The main villain in this, antagonist, was actually voiced by Vincent Price. So there does have some big names involved into it. Sherlock was actually not Sherlock in this. It's actually Basil. They did have a character playing Sherlock, but the characters in this lived underneath his house. For the voice of Sherlock was actually done by Basil Rathbone, which they actually got audio recordings of him from the 1966 reading of the Adventures of the Red-Headed League. Because at this point, he already passed away, so they just pulled recordings from him from previous things to do it. Later on, you had the Peter O'Toole. He did the 4 novels into a adaptation for cartoons, which he voiced all 4 of them. This was his second forte in Sherlock Holmes. He did a play before in 1976. He would try to be Sherlock again a couple times later on, but it just never worked out through budgeting. Actually, he didn't like the characters he would be with in one of them. One of them he was be with Laurence Olivier, but they didn't get along at times, so they couldn't be Sherlock and Watson. Another one would be Tom and Jerry, which is more of a recent one in 2010. This one, Tom and Jerry actually assists Sherlock Holmes in solving a crime. This takes place in London, and some jewels got stolen, and it's up to Tom and Jerry to help Sherlock try to find who did it. Another one that came out in the mid-'80s, in 1984 and 85, was Sherlock Hound. Interesting thing about this, even though his name is Sherlock Hound, he is not a hound. He's actually a red fox. The Japanese version of it, actually, Watson always calls him Holmes. But for some reason, in the English versions, he calls him Hound, and it stuck. So now he's known as Sherlock Hound, even though he's a red fox. Then we had Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century. This one I like just because the way they started it off. The initial scene, of the series is Sherlock and Moriarty are fighting at the Rackamore Falls and fall off, and it kind of just ends there and then jumps ahead to the 22nd century when the lady on the right, Lestrade, who's is a descendant of this Lestrade from the stories, finds Moriarty and it's like, no, he can't be alive, he's dead. How do I fight him? I know, I will get Sherlock Holmes. Well, at this point, Sherlock is dead in all sense and purposes. However, for some reason, they kept his body preserved underneath New Scotland Yard at the rightful age he was, and decided to use cryogenics and science to regenerate him, and boom, we have Sherlock Holmes for the modern era. Then, more recently, we had Sherlock Gnomes, which is a sequel to Romeo and Juliet. This Sherlock was played by or voiced by Johnny Depp. We have a lot of mixed opinions on this based on who you are. Some of you really like it because it's cute, because it's Sherlock, or some are like, no, this is bad. Then, throughout the years, this is one of the first ones, Mudd and Jeff, you would have different portrays of Sherlock throughout cartoons. Either Sherlock himself would appear or people would dress and mimic him. This was one of the first ones, which was in 1926, where they're going after a phantom caper known as the Phantom. Later on in you would have The Adventures of Sammy Sausage. This was a split live action and animated series where they would kind of more or less do stop motion and have it. So on this one, the artist here is heartbroken. So it was up to Sammy Sausage to figure out what's ailing him. Another one would be Gandy Goose. This one, he read a book that I can be a detective too. So he goes out and tries to be a detective and ends up in the woods with Frankenstein, Dracula, and a few other monsters. One of the more famous ones is Daffy Duck, who actually had 2 run-ins with Sherlock. The first one was actually a Dick Tracy spoof he had, which he was going after the villains that are obviously Dick Tracy references. But as he's going, he runs into Sherlock, and as, of course, have Daffy Duck. He says there can only be one of us in this film, and he punches Sherlock and moves on. The second one is the one that probably people are more familiar with, the Deuce You Say, with him and Porky Pig trying to solve a crime. Popeye got involved in it too when he was asked by Olive Oyl to guard her jewels. Then you have a Rocky and Bullwinkle, Boris and Natasha. This was actually a 12-part series when they would do them. This is the second of their kind of series that they would have throughout the show, where it was box tops were the currency. Bullwinkle had a bunch of them, so the authorities thought he was someone who was counterfeiting box tops for his own good. So they actually hired Boris and Natasha to solve the crime. Surprise, surprise. Gumby had his share in with Sherlock Holmes from time when he was actually dealing with Scrooge. Scrooge was causing a mecca, so he jumped in to help solve the crime. Mr. Magoo was actually portrayed as Watson for Sherlock Holmes in one of his episodes of his adventures. The Archie Show had one of Jughead, who one day decided he ordered a super sleuth's kit and decided that he was going to try to solve the crime himself. Scooby-Doo, almost every series that was out there with Scooby-Doo had some run-in with Sherlock. The one on the top right is Don Knotts. He actually voiced and acted himself as Sherlock in one of the series. The Pink Panther portrayed Sherlock one time when he woke up one morning where his cake was missing, so he went on the chase to find that. One of the big famous ones is Snoopy. In the Peanuts, it's a Mystery Charlie Brown, which shows almost once a year. I think you could find it. Chip and Dale had Alvin and the Chipmunks. Chip and Dale did one. Alvin and Chipmunks had 2 different shows based around Sherlock Holmes. The Muppet Babies had 2 different shows on Sherlock Holmes. You had the Berenstain Bears, if you remember. They not only had a TV show, but also a book out when they dressed up and Charlie solved crimes. The Care Bears, nonetheless, had a little bit of it in one of their movies. DuckTales actually had 3 different adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. They had the first one, which was based around the Howling of the Baskervilles. Second one was when the gang went actually to England and Scrooge went missing, and so they actually tried to get Sherlock to help him, but Sherlock didn't care at the time and said, "You're on your own." The third one was when the boys actually tried to find out who the identity of Gizmo Duck was. So they dressed up and went on the crime caper. The real Ghostbusters had one in the mid-90s. And yes, Sherlock and Watson are actually ghosts in this too. Mario Brothers had the one where King Koopa kidnapped Sherlock in. So Mario and Luigi go on a trail to find him. Winnie the Pooh, Tigger had his own little detective agency, if you all remember, and he did it a couple times where he would dress up from time to time as the great detective. Again, Chip and Dale had one. It was their spoof on Hound the Baskervilles, where they helped the Hound who inherited the hall, and they worked in to try to find that he was actually the rightful owner. If you ever remember Denver the Last Dinosaur, which was one of my favorites when I was a kid, he read a book or a Sherlock Holmes novel and decided that he was going to be a detective for a day. Garfield had one where he was Watson to Holmes. Then Bobby's World. Howie Mandel, if you remember him, he's the voice of Bobby. He did a show of this when he went back in time to the Victorian era. Peter Pan and the Pirates, which was a small run show, actually had it, so Peter Pan played as Sherlock Holmes at one point. Then you had the Tiny Toon Adventures, Goof Troop. So yes, Goof had one where he actually said that his ancestor was Sherlock Goof. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had a run-in with Sherlock where they actually got into a fight with him initially when they ran into him. Aladdin, where you had a genie, which if you go back in almost every cartoon in the 1980s and 90s that was by Disney had Sherlock at reference at some point, no matter how small, they would throw it in there as much as they can. Animaniacs was probably one of my favorites where they just torment Sherlock for no end. It is about a 10-minute cartoon. It is worth the time, and they just torment him to no end. Celebrity Deathmatch had Sherlock Holmes goes against Jack the Ripper. Yes, that happened. Simpsons had one. One of their Treehouse of Horrors, they had one where Lisa and Bart dressed up as Sherlock and Watson. Batman had a couple run-ins with him through cartoons and as comic books. I mean, just logical sense there. Phoebus and Ferb actually had two different versions of Sherlock, one with Phoebus and Ferb and one as a sister. She actually did a musical number during that time period. SpongeBob did two different cameos of him in two different episodes. A more recent one is actually a series of Sherlock Yak. It's a French-based cartoon where Sherlock is a zookeeper. So by day he runs a zoo, at night he solves crime. This one is currently in production and still currently going on. You can find American versions. It's kind of a concept of basically it feels like Dora Explorer, where he would solve the crimes, but he would try to get the audience to help participate in his crime solving. The Fairly Odd Parents had a little bit of him. My Little Pony even had a little run-in with him from time to time. Then one more recent one is Family Guy. They had two. One was a flashback, if you're all know, then an actual full series with Stewie and Brian as Sherlock and Watson. And one of my favorites, if you can find it on YouTube, is a 1973 UK industrial film. They actually made a film basically explaining metal sheeting and element with Sherlock and Watson doing the whole narration for about a 20 to 30 minute film. So that is on YouTube and it's interesting, I would say the least. So yes, I don't know what I did. So yeah, so again, for me, cartoons are my life, so it seems like, but that's where I learned Sherlock. So if you ever, and so yeah, where'd you go?
Thanks, Rusty. So, as you can see so far, Sherlock Holmes has been depicted in all types of media. Next up, we're going to have a presentation on Sherlock Holmes on television, and Angela Lusk and Diane will give that presentation. I've already introduced Diane to you. Angela has been a Sherlockian since childhood. She's a member of our society, and she has some illustrations published in a fan magazine. Okay, come on up.
Well, hey everybody, it's really awesome to be up here to share with you guys the passion of Sherlock Holmes and what it is like to be a Sherlockian. We're going to talk about just a few Sherlock TV shows. There are so many, it was hard to narrow it down, but we did. We narrowed it down to 5. If we talked about all the Sherlock TV shows, we'd probably be here all weekend, so we'll save you. So what I'll do is it's gonna be kind of like a bit of a show and tell. We'll talk a little bit about the 5 films we've decided to show you guys, and then we will show you clips at the end of those 5, or not films, sorry, TV shows. We'll show you clips of those 5 TV shows at the end. So Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, they've been on TV for actually over 60 years. And new adaptations are being created, pretty much every day. All right, so the first one, First one we like to talk about today is Ronald Howard's Sherlock Holmes. Ronald Howard played Sherlock Holmes, and Howard Marion Crawford was Dr. Watson. It first aired the fall of 1954 to the fall of 1955. There were 39 episodes and only 1 season. And Diane, why might they be interested in watching this show?
We haven't rehearsed this. But Ronald Howard is actually the son of Leslie Howard, which was mentioned before. And this was actually almost the American, this was actually an American series, which is very bizarre. And it was syndicated, and it, oddly enough, had a great number of episodes, like over 56 episodes, right? 39 episodes. And it varied from quality. Some of them were very, very good. Some of them were really bad. And it's kind of interesting seeing British actors try to do a Texan accent. So, because there was one time a Texas cowgirl seeked his help, and that was a horrible accent. But it was actually strangely comedic, for whatever reason, to appeal to American audiences rather than British audiences. So it's a little kooky, and it was a lot of humor, and one of my favorite running jokes is Holmes making tea with poison cups. And it's always labeled poison. And it's like, okay, it's all right, I watched it, I think. But it is pretty much freely available. It's actually public domain now, and most of it is available on YouTube. So there you go.
Okay, awesome. Well, the second show would be Granada's Sherlock Holmes, and a lot of you are probably familiar with it, or at least the Sherlockians of us, I guess. Jeremy Brett played Sherlock Holmes, and David Burke, and then later Edward Hardwicke played Dr. Watson. The series was actually a collection of stories that went from 1984 to 1994. There were 41 episodes in total, and 5 of these were feature-length specials. And so, Diane, interesting facts about the show?
Well, one, as we discussed before, Jeremy Brett did play Watson before in Crucifer of Blood. Edward Hardwicke is actually son of Sir Cedric Hardwicke. And this series has known to be one of the most, it's considered one of the best adaptations of the Sherlock Holmes stories to live action film. For the most part, they were quite authentic, pretty much to the text. Not all of them, but most of them were. And it became an international hit. It came on PBS with Mystery, and it was originally hosted by Vincent Price, and later Diana Rigg. So this is my introduction to Sherlock Holmes in live action. But like Rusty, I was introduced to Sherlock Holmes through animation. So.
Awesome. Well, the third TV show that we're going to talk about is the Russian TV series, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Vasily Livanov played Holmes. Vasily, excuse me. I'm very Texan. And then Vitaly Solomon as Dr. Watson. It aired from 1979 to 1986. And it was actually 5 films that were split into 11 episodes. And Diane, would you like to talk more about that one?
I absolutely love this series. It's interesting that it is completely done in Russian, but all the text, like all the books that they read in the Reichi on the wall, it's all in English. And interesting enough, he is so popular. This particular version is so popular in Russia that there is a statue of Sherlock Holmes in Moscow. And for whatever reason, it's in Moscow when the series was actually filmed closer to St. Petersburg. I don't know why. But he was honored by Queen Elizabeth II with an OBE. And he's still alive today, and he still gets fan mail, and he answers it. So, and he also did Sherlock Holmes in animation as well, Sally did. So he's also very well known. And if anybody ever was interested, he's one of the first Holmes with glasses, so who actually wears glasses. And another interesting thing that I love about this series is as an American watching this series, you could see the culture is very different. You can feel the Iron Curtain, because this was filmed during the Cold War. And another thing is that the villains look like villains, like they're cartoonish villains. They're 2 steps away from twirling their mustaches and tying women to train tracks. But I guess in Russia, that's how you see villains. They're very, very obviously evil. But I recommend this series. It just recently got remastered onto DVD. It's not available here in the US, but if you have like a multiplayer thing, it's actually available on Amazon to order, and you can get it on YouTube, but it's actually more available on Dailymotion. Okay.
That's funny. All right, so the fourth and probably the more recent, I would definitely imagine, is BBC Sherlock. Oh, yeah. This was actually what kind of made me get back into the fandom, because I was like, Sherlock with a cell phone, what is this? But it made me go back and read the canon again and just fall deeply in love with it. But so BBC Sherlock Benedict Cumberbatch plays Holmes, and Martin Freeman plays Dr. Watson. It's aired from 2010 and actually to 2017. There's been 11 episodes and 4 seasons, and I don't know if it's been confirmed, but it's confirmed. Yes, there's a confirmed season 5. And so, Diane, why might people want to watch Sherlock BBC?
Unlike Angela, I am not a huge fan of this series. And it's nothing to do.
We're still friends. It's okay.
Yeah, we're still friends
yeah.
despite that.
Yeah.
My complaint about it is nothing to do with the actors and the production. It's how it's written, and which is the complete opposite of the next series coming up in this slide. But I enjoy this series at a distance. I watch it because it's my priority too, but I don't really like it so much. But if you enjoy it and if it makes you read the stories, who cares?
Yes.
So who cares? If you enjoy it, love it. Yeah. I love an animated mouse version of Sherlock Holmes. Do I care if you hate it? No. But it's still a very good series if you like that sort of thing.
Well, thank you for that unbiased talk about that. So our last, we'd like to talk about CBS's Elementary. Johnny Lee Miller plays Holmes, and Lucy Liu in A Gender Bend plays Joan Watson. It's actually still going. It started the fall of 2012, and the last, I believe, was fall of 2018, just this year. Yeah, there's 141 episodes and 6 seasons. So, Diane?
And it got confirmed for another season, just last month. So again, this is the American syndicated version, which is very opposite of BBC. My opinion of this series is the exact opposite of the BBC. I love the writing. I don't like the cast, and I don't like the production. That is the complete opposite, but it's still, if you enjoy it, it's a great series, actually. I like what keeps me watching this is the writing. The acting, not so much, but that's okay. But yes, it has been confirmed, and I think we're gonna, I think Moriarty's coming back. So as far as I know, I don't know how, but it's gonna do it.
So we hope that you guys will don your deerstalker and pop some popcorn and enjoy all the awesome TV shows that and adaptations of Sherlock Holmes.
No, I have nothing to add, except happy hunting.
Okay, thanks, Angela and Diane. Next up, we're going to have a Sherlock Holmes-related mystery game that's participatory for all of those of you that want to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and do the close now so that when that's finished, folks can just leave or whatever. Can I have all of the members of our society stand? Because most of you played a part in this. And I just wanted to thank you all for helping with that. And for everyone else, I'm sure now you can see that there's a lot more to Sherlock Holmes than just what you may have been exposed to previously. It's a whole world out there with different kinds of media and so forth. And just want you to know we really appreciate those of you who attended. And we have our society. You're welcome to come to those meetings. We meet normally on the first Sunday of every month at the La Madeleine on Beltline, just east of the toll road in Addison, and you're welcome to attend. If you go to our website and our Facebook page, there are notices there. You can also sign up for email notices from the society on the website, and you'll learn more about us.